When we hear a sound, most of us are able to distinguish its basic attributes and describe how it makes us feel. We can make judgments on the emotions it elicits, recognize contrasting pitches, maybe identify patterns within it. For musicians who have spent many years training and perfecting our perception of pitch, every sound is translated as a certain note. Pitch recognition is our most valuable skill, as perfect intonation is the ever-distant goal we strive for when we play our instruments. Advanced musicians can hear a note played and almost immediately identify it by name. Someone who can do this flawlessly is said to have perfect pitch, a quality that, to possess it, one must be born with.
I'm going to play a set of 8 notes. Each note will play for 5 seconds. Respond as quickly as you can. If you misidentify one or do not respond within 5 seconds after the note is played, we will move on to the next one. Here is your reference A.
This is a standard pitch perception test, where, after given a reference, a set of notes are played and the objective is to identify them as quickly as possible.
Here's your next one.
D.
Correct. Here's your next one.
E flat.
Correct.
For a string instrument player, particularly those instruments that are unfretted, listening to a certain note can provoke our deepest emotions and elicit a physical response, or the instinct to respond the only way we know how. The response is both neurochemical and muscular, and when restrained, it may manifest itself as a reflexive twitch of the fingers. When we hear a note, even if we cannot name it, we have an awareness of the finger patterns necessary to recreate it on our instruments, and feel a subtly pressing need to act on this. This phenomenon, in its most basic state, is a muscle memory, but the term for the specific instinct among musicians is a pitch recognition dexterity reaction, and this is how it works. The process begins at the tympanic membrane, where the physical attributes of sound are relayed as a mechanical stimulus. This mechanical code is transmitted into the middle ear ossicles, the malleus, incus, and stapes, then transmitted as hydraulic energy for transmission through the fluid-filled cochlea. Inside the cochlea along the basilar membrane, specific sections are responsible for reception of different frequencies, each with a very specific number of supercilia. The higher the frequency, the higher the perceived pitch. When the supercilia of a certain frequency are stimulated by the cochlear fluid waves, they release neurochemical messengers, which excite the nerves of hearing. The physical characteristics of the original acoustic signal are preserved at every energy change along the way, until the code becomes one that the central auditory pathways can direct to the temporal lobe of the brain for processing and recognition. In the brain of a trained musician, once the note has registered, the process to replicate it begins. Motor neurons transmit the impulse to the skeletal muscle fibers in the muscles of the forearm. The contractions of these muscles move the tendons that move the fingers in delicate patterns to finally create the desired sound from the instrument. Over years of ear training, exact pitches become associated with exact fingerings. The critical bridge between hearing the pitch and replicating it is found in this specific area of the brain. Looking at this diagram, we can see that the premotor cortex is highlighted in yellow. The auditory cortex is highlighted in teal. As the premotor cortex runs laterally across the cerebral hemispheres, the auditory cortex runs obliquely along the temporal lobe. At the extremities of both, they seemingly meet and form a V shape. This close association of these two regions is considered to be the transitional point from sound to action. During an MRI, significant overlap of cognitive activity levels are observed in both regions, suggesting that they interact in both perception and production. The music appreciation areas of the brain are activated in different levels according to the style of music that is being played, and the emotions the music elicits also fluctuate with a varying intensity. What you are seeing is an MRI of the brain during different segments of an etude. The color indicates the level of activity during the segment of that piece. Observe as the colors change with the changes in the mood of the music. It begins with the gradual, easy changes with the calmness. As music intensifies and becomes more dissonant, the brain cannot make sense of the chord and becomes distressed, and the activity levels reflect this. When a musician is young and they have not yet developed pitch-to-muscle memory, there may be a considerable lag between the placement of fingers and the correction of pitch. Because they don't yet have the pitch reference in their memory, it takes longer for them to arrive at the correct note. For many orchestra instructors, it's a common practice to have students play scales for warm-ups to work on their intonation. You can notice the lag in their finger adjustment, as their finger placement isn't as certain, and they don't yet have an internalized concept of pitch. When the teacher plays their scales with them, if they are paying attention, they almost instantly become more in tune and their finger placement becomes more accurate. This is because as soon as a student has internalized the reference, his or her pitch memory center in the temporal lobe recognizes the note and associates it with a movement of his or her fingers. The more accurate note heard is positive feedback. Every experience like this builds the music memory bank and accumulates further precision. In addition to basic learning taking place, instrumentalists can memorize vast passages of music, some of the greatest concert performers in history memorizing hours of complicated concertos. With young students, while they are not ready to play Wieniawski's Violin Concerto in D minor, Elgar's Cello Concerto in E minor, or Bach's Viola Concerto in C minor, they can begin to commit to memory brief passages and begin the most rudimentary level of music memorization. The teacher plays a short sequence of notes and the students repeat it back to the teacher. Students are hearing the passage, and the pitch recognition dexterity reaction becomes accustomed not only to the individual fingerings and pitches, but also to a series of notes as they relate to one another. In the music memory, they are strung together complementarily and can be remembered with relative ease. This can be seen especially in the area of fiddle music. This is a fiddle song that is commonly played by the Grand Haven High School fiddle group Go Talk, which, by the way, has an Irish festival on March 12th that you should all come to. It will be an exhibition of mastery of muscle memory and also thoroughly entertaining. The culmination of years of intonation training and musical discipline can be seen in the most elite musicians. This is Varun, concertmaster of the Grand Haven High School Chamber Orchestra. His intonation and finger placement are so accurate that it is essentially impossible to hear any discrepancies. Varun is playing the solo violin passage from Vivaldi's Summer from the Four Seasons, a very difficult violin concerto. It is a requirement to memorize this part, and internalization of the notes as they complement one another and the fingering that go along with them takes hours of practice to perfect. Next time you observe a performance of an orchestra or any string instrument player, do of course enjoy the music, but perhaps take a moment to just appreciate the feat you are witnessing. The balancing act of coordination, pitch perception, and finger muscle memory in relation to dexterity take a great deal of brain power. Perhaps this is why some of the most renowned geniuses throughout history have been musicians.